Good evening and a very warm welcome to the next edition of the Karmayogi Talks, which is a series of talks with policy experts, practitioners, academicians, government leaders from across the world, wherein we bring together a topic on which we deliberate, which relates to all of us. And we have been doing several such talks in which experts have spoken to us, given their insights, and discussed about pertinent topics which impacts the governments all over, as also societies. In today's edition of Talks, we have a very distinguished speaker with us, who will be Mr. Jamie, who is the founding director of the Global Opportunity Youth Network. He will be discussing future of work with our own member of the Capacity Building Commission, Praveen Pardeshi, sir. So without much ado, I will hand it over to my colleague Priyanka to initiate this session of Karmayogi Talks, wherein Mr. Jamie will be in conversation with Praveen Pardeshi.
Thank you so much, sir. Welcome, everyone. We are very glad to have today with us a very renowned speaker who's going to talk on the topic Future of Work, Work for Youth. Please welcome everyone, Jamie McAuliffe, who is the founding director of Global Opportunity Youth Network. As a founding director, Jamie McAuliffe launched the Global Opportunity Youth Network with the Aspen Institute in 2018 as the first global place-based network of communities and young leaders committed to advancing cross-sectoral approaches to expedite gainful opportunities of job for the youth. An alumnus for Teach for India, Jamie holds a master's degree from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. He is also a Schwab Foundation global social entrepreneur and a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations. We are really delighted to have you, Jamie, today for this session of Karmayogi Talks. Welcome again. Jamie will be in conversation with Mr. Praveen Pardeshi, who is the Member Capacity Building Commission, an IAS officer of the 1985 batch. Mr. Praveen Pardeshi, with 3 decades of exemplary administrative experience behind him, has held several senior positions, including Additional Chief Secretary to the Chief Minister of Maharashtra and Municipal Commissioner of Mumbai. Beyond this, Mr. Pardeshi has served in multiple leadership positions with the United Nations, having been the global head of UNDP Geneva and senior coordinator of UNISDR. He is currently a member with the Capacity Building Commission of India. It is our pleasure, sir, to have you with us for today's session. So without any further delay, I would request Praveen Pardeshi, sir, to start this conversation with our renowned speaker today. Over to you, sir.
So thank you very much, Jamie, for joining us. In fact, the morning session was so exciting, though I thought that a lot more public servants should hear this, because all of us are grappling with this issue of how to convert the huge youth bulge that we have into a demographic dividend. And you have worked on global networking. So the way I would like to go is maybe you just speak for the first 10-15 minutes on your ideas on how youth, particularly rural youth, and the issue which you raised about women and women participation in the workforce, how we can enhance that and make fair work opportunities available to youth in India. And then we can pursue a few questions after your initial statements or initial remarks. Over to you.
Okay, fantastic. So it's a pleasure to be with you. It was really nice to meet you, sir, and to hear some of your comments about some of the ways that we have to break through what has been largely, as you said, jobless growth over the last many years in India. And let me just back up by saying a few words about my institution and what we're all about, because I think it ties in very nicely to this theme. So the Global Opportunity Youth Network, which is housed at the Aspen Institute, but counts on partners in India, Africa, and Latin America, was really set up to bring together a network of communities and young people themselves in a global community to really address the challenge of youth unemployment at scale. India, as everybody knows, is it's the world's future workforce, right? I mean, you have more young people in India than we have in terms of the total population of the United States. Between India and Sub-Saharan Africa, this is the workforce of the 21st century. And if we don't figure out a way to invest in this, as you said, youth dividend, and create the kinds of pathways and opportunities for them to get into productive work, we're not only going to be failing India, we're going to be failing the world economy. So this is incredibly important. It's a real privilege for me to be here speaking with you and visiting with our partners in places like Barwani and MP, Pune in Maharashtra. We're also doing work with another partner, Transform Rural India in Jharkhand. And our basic approach is to not try to introduce a new model or new solution that we think is going to be the silver bullet to youth employment. And this is something we talked about at our event today. We really feel like that has been the strategy of a lot of policymakers, a lot of nonprofits, that they think they're going to skill their way out of the problem of youth unemployment, or they're going to mentor their way out of youth unemployment, or entrepreneurship is the answer. And the fact is, it's really all of the above. Youth unemployment is not like a disease or something that has a single turnkey solution. It's so complex that we've got to bring all of the solutions together. And what we've decided is that the best way to model that is not at the national level, at least in our case, not at even the state level, but at the local, district, and municipal level, because that's really where you can bring together the critical local stakeholders from government, the local economy in terms of the business sector, who will ultimately absorb the labor in that district, and young people themselves. And we create collaboratives to bring these people, these stakeholders together. And we do a deep mapping of the local economy to really understand the current situation in terms of how many young people are there, what the possible sectors of growth are, what the entrepreneurship barriers are. And that's where we also lift up the structural barriers that are really impeding certain segments of young people. And certainly young women in India, as we also talked about this morning, is such a critical part of the equation. I worked for many years in the Middle East and North Africa. I led a jobs training program there. And in many ways, young women also in that region were 2 to 3 times less likely to be in the workforce. And we've got to change that equation, that dynamic, to make sure that young women get the kind of support from their families, from their peers, and ultimately from educational institutions and businesses to get into the workforce. So I'll say a couple more things about how this ties to the theme that we're talking about in terms of future of work. So I was on a commission of the World Economic Forum that studied this for several years and put out a Future of Jobs report. And there are lots of great studies that try to predict the skilling needs of employers next year and 10 years. But at the end of the day, there's still some fundamental things that I think we know about the needs of businesses today and what they will be in the future. And they come back to many of the same things that I know you and others are working on, which is you've got to build that base of foundational skills. You've got to instill a sense of meaning and purpose in young people so that they can then go on and gain more skills, gain more education, have a sense of purpose, that their life means something. They can set goals, and they can move beyond the first barrier. The first time they get yelled at by their boss, they can bounce back. So all of those sort of foundational supports is something that we try to instill with our partners and becomes the base to build on. And then, yes, you absolutely have to map to the skills of employers who are hiring or future employers in critical sectors. One of the things we didn't talk about this morning, but I think is really important, which is, yes, predicting future skills is useful, predicting how sectors are going to change and grow and how automation is affecting all of this. But really what is, I think, the most important thing is to recognize the pace of change. So what is really changing now is just how everything is accelerating. And so one of the things we're trying to do with our partners in local districts is to make sure we can try to keep up with demand. We can no longer do what we used to do in many educational institutions and training programs, which is design training courses and essentially let them sit for 10 years without, maybe we do a few updates here and there. But in the meantime, nowadays, if you are not refreshing your course or totally redesigning it for new, especially in technology, new software that comes online, new coding programs, you're just not connecting to the market. So you need to have much more rapid skilling and reskilling cycles. And that's tough for governments to do because they have systems they have to run. So we're trying to figure out with our government partners and with systems, how do you build in market intelligence and data that helps them and their trainers continue to upgrade and make their skilling courses relevant for the jobs of today, but also of the next few years. So that sort of rapid pace of market intelligence, reskilling is something that I think is a really big part of preparing for the future of work and becoming much more nimble in the education to employment transition and pipeline. And then, this is also on young people themselves. As I said, we need to make it easy for them. I mean, we talk about 3 gaps that could summarize what often young people face. There's, for many, it's just an information gap. And one of the things that I was struck when I met our partners in Barwani is one of the things they recognized when they went into that district is that there's no place for young people to come to even know about what government programs they have access to, what they're entitled to, what kinds of jobs might be available and employers hiring. And of course, access to training or other supports that could get them ready. So our partners have created a network of youth hubs that create these safe places for young people to come get access to those kinds of information. So access to information is one gap. Access, obviously, to skills that are relevant for the market, for businesses and for entrepreneurship is a second. And then the third is the toughest one, I think, and that's the expectations gap. And this is where you've got to really map the aspirations of young people with the real opportunities that they have in front of them. And I think you were one of our speakers this morning, talked about the high rate of the educated but unemployed, because you understand, you graduate as an engineer in India, you want to get a great engineering job at a certain salary level, but there aren't enough engineering jobs to fill all the engineering, to have all the engineering graduates fill them. So we have to also work with young people to help them understand that even if they can't get their dream job as their first job, they've got to really start somewhere, build an experience, and then proceed from there. And that's maybe the last thing I'll mention before turning it over for questions is that, there's something we call the experience trap. So we heard this when I was just talking with employers in Pune last week. Every employer I know, from the Middle East to Latin America to the US, always says, oh, well, we'd love to hire more young people, but we need young people with experience. And young people are saying, well, how the heck am I going to get experience if you won't hire me? It's like this paradox that we can't break through. And so, one of the things that we talked about this morning, and we're really trying to figure out systemic ways to do this, is to create a culture of internships, certainly apprenticeships where that can work, but even internships where companies will open up their doors. One of the things that I did in my old organization was during the training, you just have young people spend an afternoon in a business just to get a feel for what a work environment's like. Even that small thing can make a difference. But anyway, creating those live experiences, learning while working is certainly a critical component to this, and something I know you and others are really trying to encourage in India with apprenticeship schemes, and I would say just to work with the private sector to try to help them become more open to creating internship options for young people in India. So I know that I sort of covered a range of things, but I'm happy to stop there and see if there's anything that I can.
Let's start with one of the tenets, which is also very new to all of us. Our Prime Minister is now talking about district as the unit for governance and development. And also you spoke about how we can create jobs at the district level. So how do we, because people, so far the model has been that economies of scale, agglomeration takes place in large cities and people migrate for jobs to Mumbai, to Delhi, to the big cities. But now we are trying to reverse that and say we should create equally good jobs in villages. And how do we do that? It's not been done very successfully almost anywhere in the world. I'd like to hear that.
So, right. No, great question. And, we heard some of our speakers today talk about how the end game is migration. We should try to encourage more people in India to migrate to the cities. I guess my perspective is that it's the classic, psychiatrist response. It's not either or, it's both, right? You've got to both try to encourage opportunity in the urban centers, and obviously want to make migration easier where that is possible. But absolutely, you've got to try to create opportunities in especially rural districts and aspirational districts like the ones that our partners are working in. And by the way, in the surveys we have done with young people, most young people don't want to move. I mean, this is necessity migration, not opportunity migration for one of them. So that's, I guess, maybe the best way to summarize. You want to encourage opportunity migration and try to figure out how to stem or try to solve for necessity migration. And again, there's not a silver bullet answer to this, but I can just illustrate how we're trying to do this at a district level with our partners. So number one, it's really having a granular understanding of what the potential opportunities are in that district. And especially in rural areas where most of it is agricultural based, it's really looking at how the agricultural asset, that it really is an asset in those districts, can be utilized to get more value added kinds of opportunities. So, an example that I saw just last week when I was in Barwani visiting a farmer is that his father, who I met on the farm for years, was growing wheat, and that was, cash crop, and he was able to make a decent living for him and his family. But his son, who had, some ambitions, connected with some of our mentors and agro entrepreneurs to give him some advice, basically encouraged him to think about a different crop that was more value added that he could grow. And he's now set up a flower farm, and he's now growing flowers in that farm. And we've connected through our partners with local markets where he can sell the flowers. And the big news that he was sharing on our visit is that he's now negotiating with all the wedding services to basically sell the flowers for the wedding celebration. I was there during wedding season last week. There were weddings every 5 blocks, it seemed like. So anyway, this is just a small story to say, look at the asset, but think about the value added. And you can only really do that at the local level. Imagine if I said to you, okay, we've got to convert, millions of hectares of wheat now to flowers. Like at the national level, you're not going to roll out a program to do that. But it does make sense in this local economy to see where those opportunities are. Another one is that we've created a whole analysis of the value chain that exists in lac production. Am I saying that right? The seed that is used, lac, thank you. So I think it's those kinds of granular, very localized, contextualized opportunities that is certainly part of the solution to trying to create opportunities in local rural districts.
Oh, so that's great. So what you have really highlighted is that each district or each sub-geography has a comparative advantage in its specific geography, and try to utilize that and not standardize across large regions. So that's a really good place to start with. The other thing in terms of our topic is the future of work in relation to really changing technology. That is, we are having Internet of Things. Industry 4.0 is, there are Volkswagen factories in India and in Germany. Now, the Volkswagen in India factory located in Pimpri-Chinchwad, where you visited in Pune, is still, in a sense, manual. But you visit the same factory in Germany, and every part is being fixed by a robot. And of course, India is also exporting Volkswagen cars to Africa, and so is Germany exporting. But the time will come when all those workers working there in Pune on the Volkswagen factory may not be needed once the robotics comes in. So that's just one area. But there are so many such changes which are taking place, where even in modern industry, new technologies, will end up displacing work. And that's a very sobering thought for youth. So how do we challenge this issue? How do we go beyond it?
Well, I mean, definitely automation is an issue. You know, I got very discouraged in my old job when I was running this training organization in the Middle East. We were training for BPO jobs, and I was talking to colleagues in the US, this is like 10 years ago, and they were all being automated. So I felt like I was training young people for jobs that were going to go away in 2 to 3 years. So we definitely have to, and this is part of the, you know, the constant conversation about skilling and reskilling and upskilling, because jobs will come and go. That's been true ever since the Industrial Revolution, right? So I guess the two things I'd say that might help. One is, I think that one of the things that I'm starting to see a little bit in some of the work we're doing, but also in other areas, is if you can create, you know, the infrastructure in a local district with skilling providers, with government, with young people, to you know, create that strategy we were talking about local economic development at the district level, and also a group that is accountable for making sure that young people access opportunity, that should become a magnet for businesses to potentially look at that district and say, hey, these guys have something going on. Maybe I should set up one of my operations there. Maybe I can try to franchise my model there. I mean, one of the, you know, certainly capital is one of the biggest constraints to growing businesses, bigger businesses I'm talking about. But the next question they're always asking me is, what's the talent and skill to feed, you know, to meet my workforce needs? And I know there's been a lot of reluctance for companies to go into more rural areas, but as you or somebody else was pointing out, the rural kind of urban, peri-urban distinction is also, you know, starting to get much more nuanced and gray in India. So I think, anyway, just what I'm trying to say is that by showcasing the activity and the talent and the commitment of local actors in districts, and sort of lifting that up so that businesses know that there are districts like this out there that they could potentially come and invest in, I think is one thing I would really want to emphasize. The second is obviously to think about the labor-intensive sectors that are producing jobs. So, you know, the care economy is certainly one that could really invest more in, and I think young people, you know, in our experience, aren't really aware of the opportunities to potentially train up and become, you know, involved in the care economy, either as community health workers or as home care nurses, or, you know, there's a whole sort of ecosystem of jobs in the healthcare system that I think are not really on the radar of a lot of young people. So that's one that I would point out as very promising. And then certainly, you know, if we can get to the next phase of the green revolution in terms of the green economy and green jobs, where it's not just, you know, installing, you know, solar panel fields that don't frankly create a lot of jobs, but it's actually the kind of retail jobs in green in terms of, you know, e-vehicles, you know, e-rickshaws. That was one of the nice examples we saw today. Those, you know, we want to start investing and emphasizing those opportunities to get ahead of sort of, as one of our speakers today, leapfrog some of these barriers.
Thank you. So I'll now come to the issue which really is a key one, which is how do we enhance the participation of women, especially women who are youth, in the workforce. And across the demographic history of, let's say, the Western world or the developed world, it's when women started participating in the workforce in larger numbers and became equal to men that the country really became developed. And as long as women didn't work in the workforce, those countries still remain quite a way behind. So that's like a very big challenge for India, especially when jobs are short and there are so many other biological reasons why, you know, people think that maybe it's better to employ a man rather than a woman. So how do we sort of get women the same opportunities to be part of this growing workforce?
Yeah, there's no easy answer to that, and I know the statistics are a little discouraging in terms of workforce participation from women in India, but you know, I think one of the things that we've also worked on and we're talking a lot about is it's got to start with that mind shift change. Young women themselves have to see that there's more to life than staying home and getting married early and having children. And that kind of mind shift change has to happen. Again, it comes back to being in the local community and having examples and role models of young women who have decided to start working and train for a job and maybe delay their marriage by a few years, which has some spillover effects in terms of maybe having a few fewer children, and there are all sorts of positive benefits. So I think working on a combination of things at the local level that raise role models and bring young women role models to the fore. In the work we're doing with our partners in Barwani, over 50% of the participants are young women who are getting jobs for the first time or becoming entrepreneurs. And the more we can highlight and showcase that as a viable pathway, I think that's one small way we can do it. Certainly by also thinking about the other barriers that young women in particular face in certain places, right? So a lot of young women in our communities won't travel after dark, but they have, jobs that maybe require them to work later and into the evening. So companies have to be, nimble about that. Think about different hours and, be a little bit more flexible in terms of what they're looking for from young women. So I think there are those sorts of practical business practices that can open up possibilities. I know this is a long way away, but the other big theme with a lot of our communities is to provide some childcare. So we're never going to get away from the fact that a lot of young women do marry early, have children, but still want to work. And if they had the opportunity to get support in some kind of childcare, that also would give more choice and more options. But the bottom line is that we've got to do everything possible to get more young women and women into the workforce, because that's going to be just yield dividends, well beyond just the youth dividend we always talk about.
No, that's absolutely true. One of the things which the government of Maharashtra has done is that in every sector, 1/3 of the recruitment in government services is for women. So, very interestingly, services which work in deep forest areas like the forest service, and there are forest guards, and they have to battle, let's say, wild animals at times, not battle, but basically manage poachers, not ensure, and they have to live in remote areas. So at the beginning, there was a lot of resistance to, taking 1/3 of them. And the criteria that we chose is that you have to run a certain number of kilometers, and then if you come physically fit. So many women were easily beating the men because the boys were more busy trying to prepare while the girls were far more nimble. So instead of 1/3, we were starting to get 50%, even 55%, recruits as women guards. And then the senior officers would start saying that, oh, this way that I will not be able to protect my forests from things. But then we found out many, many great advantages. One of the biggest advantages, of course, they were far more sincere, far more dedicated, but because they were first-time job owners, so the sincerity also came with the self-assurance that they had broken out of, being in the traditional family mode. And so many advantages, like if there is let's say, an attempt to encroach on forests, or there is but if the women are in the forefront, then even the villagers are very afraid to try to do any harm, because they know that the various laws which protect women against any type of harassment, those can be applied. And while if there were men guards, sometimes they can be beaten up by a mob, but not women. So many times the forest guards started saying, okay, let's keep the women in front because nobody can touch them, and then we'll do the work from behind. So that way, there are so many advantages which we need to take on. I think I'll go to one last issue which I had thought of is we have lots of training institutions, but always it's been found that it's easier to train people to be salaried people, that is wage seekers. But it's almost impossible to train youth to be entrepreneurs. And, and these are all many times first generation. So there is a saying that maybe if you're an entrepreneur or born an entrepreneur, but a salaried worker, you can always train yourself to. But do you think there is a way out of this, and we can create more job makers out of youth rather than job seekers? Because that's a big challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, while I do react to the folks who say that, youth entrepreneurship is the silver bullet to the youth unemployment crisis. I think you gotta distinguish between the different levels of entrepreneurship. Yes, sure, maybe you're a born entrepreneur, if you become Mark Zuckerberg, you're born with a certain capability to get you to that, unicorn level. But I don't believe that at all for people who just are trying to get a first business off the ground or a means to self-employment. I mean, young people are just naturally creative. If we give them the platform and the support and what I mentioned, even the simplest thing, if they have somebody who they trust or respect who's telling them they can do it, that they have potential, I think that those small things are so important, because so many of the young people we work with are just beaten down by everyday life, that they need somebody who says they believe in them. That's why it's so incredible to see the organizations that have people on their teams who are working day in and day out to prove you wrong, and not you, but prove the naysayers wrong, that we can create entrepreneurs if we have the right set of supports. Now, I'll say one other thing this is sort of a personal pet peeve of mine, which is that I think a lot of people say, oh, in order to create youth entrepreneurs, you have to give them access to money, to credit. Like that's the key barrier. Actually, I don't believe that. I think that the one of the biggest constraints is that you've got to make sure that young people can come up with their own ideas that are viable in the local market, and they have an understanding of how to build out. So that's where a lot of the sort of business advice, business incubation, boot camps, all of those kinds of techniques, I think, have been proven to work. And certainly access to credit is important, but it's not the limiting factor for most young entrepreneurs, especially in a place like India that has an internal market that can absorb a lot more entrepreneurship if you've got the right ideas and linkages to value chains and markets. China grew most of its businesses through just turnover, revenue generation, not through lots of microloans. Microloans are important. There's a tendency, I think, in the youth entrepreneurship space to say we got to build a loan facility first before we can do anything else. I think there's a lot more you can do along the way, and then microcredit will certainly spur it and stimulate it, and certainly create opportunities for smaller businesses to grow and hire more young people, which is also an incredibly important aspect of the whole job creation equation. But yeah, I definitely think you can train, and entrepreneurs definitely can be creative. We've seen that around the world.
Oh, that's very positive. So I think I will end with asking Priyanka if you have any comments to make or any questions to ask, and then we can come to the conclusion of this talk. So over to you.
Definitely. Thanks, Praveen sir, for giving this opportunity. I couldn't stop myself. I was making notes all this time and was wondering if I'll get this opportunity. Thanks to you. So Jimmy, very quickly, I really resonate with the idea that one gap that you mentioned, the expectation gap, where the skills of youth are not clearly mapped with what they're expecting. I think that's one area where we need to strike and catch these young people. Catch these people young, what are the skills that they possess. And what generally happens is, and I'm talking from my own experience, the stage when we have just completed our 12th, and that's when we enter, we apply for various exams to enter graduation. That's the time we should be well aware of what are the skills we possess and what are those inherent skills that we can build our career upon. However, apparently what happens in actuality is we get influenced by the herd phenomena that works. Like if all of my colleagues are doing engineering, then let me give it a try, without even thinking whether my skill, whether my interest lies in that domain or not. So from your experience, if you could share a few examples wherein you have tried to cater to this problem of helping the young people understand what are the skills that they possess, and probably not just following the herd, being influenced by the herd.
Yeah, it's a great question, and again, not a silver bullet, but one really important thing that we've seen work in many places is to build some of that early career guidance while young people are still in school, so that yes, they can see if they become an engineer, what that will yield, but that there are many other paths. And so programs that, for example, bring entrepreneurs and business leaders into the classroom, into schools to speak about different career options, I think is one important solution or program that we've seen. Also, helping young people while they're still in school, while they have the kind of safety of being in school and they haven't yet had to go out and make it on their own, create initial life plans that set some goals and where they can start to see what will it actually take to get to where I want to be once I leave school. I think those are all really important steps that you can take while they're in school. And then what I was talking about also with the expectations gap is just, again, this is a little bit of the kind of mind shift, cultural shift work that can best happen in local communities where there are role models that can talk to other young people and show them that these are the first steps I took before getting on to the salary job that pays 3 times the minimum wage, and just encouraging by example. And one of the things I used to go around and say is, my first job was I was a construction worker. My second job is I bust dishes to earn some money. You got to start somewhere, and you got to build experience. That also goes to the experience trap I was mentioning. So sending those messages, and not from old guys like me now, but like from other young people who are just a few years ahead, to give them that advice, to show role models that have succeeded and the different paths they've taken. So it doesn't always take a professional degree or an engineering degree. Sometimes it doesn't take a degree at all. This is another conversation that we're having in the United States, which is that we've got to kind of move away from credential being the golden goose, and really emphasize competencies and skills, because a lot of jobs don't need degrees. Now, I don't want to, I'm a product of university professors. I'm the last one to say that university education is useless, but we've got to really be thinking much more flexibly about the kinds of paths that young people can take. As people talked about today, Europe has done an amazing job in countries to provide, these alternate apprenticeship pathways, so that, the CEO of Zurich Insurance, he was an apprentice. He never went to college or university, because they also value that as a society. I know I've kind of gone off your question, but those are a few of the thoughts.
No, that was really enlightening. And I really agree. I think that's high time that we move away from the credentials, just the credentials being the core of any job, but how we start looking at skills. I think at Karmayogi Bharat, through this I Got Karmayogi platform, that's the focus. We try to build the skills, attitudes, and competencies of the officers which are required for the role that they are deployed at. So very enlightening.
And you need companies to tell you also. This is the other thing. You've got to be in conversation with companies to understand what skills and competencies are. And then if they don't require a college degree, you got to convince them, hey, maybe take that out as one of your requirements. That will open up the talent pool for you. So many businesses, scream about the skills shortage and the talent gap. I think sometimes they're being a little too narrow in what they're considering in their hiring practices. So that's another kind of perception practice change you can do with employers.
No, absolutely right. Recently in Pune, I had been to one of the very old factories. It's called Walchand Nagar. So that factory builds India's Gaganyaan, which is taking human beings into space. It also builds the missiles for many of the defense research and development organizations, land-to-land missiles. And the person who was showing me around this Gaganyaan sort of line, he said his CEO said proudly that he joined as a worker on this line, and he was not even a graduate, just a school, and then he became a diploma holder while working on that line, and then over the years acquired a further degree while working there on engineering, and now he heads the entire line of rocket production, and he never went through any formal education. And he said that I do this because as per secretary. So it's companies which also can build these cultures. I mean, Japan does it a lot, that once they hold somebody, they hold and groom that person right to the end. So I think a lot of corporate culture can also shift that they can build the talent and retain the talent as you go. So Priyanka, over to you. Maybe we can sort of bring this talk to a conclusion. And I really want to thank Jamie for giving us such a lot of good practical examples from across India and across the world of how we can leverage and get youth to look at opportunities and also harness those opportunities for their own self-growth and for better employment.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.